Hello there, how are we? Nice to see everyone. Is everyone well? It's one of those difficult situations where I can see you. I know you can hear me. So hi, how are you all? Everyone all right? Jolly good. My name's Carl Kennedy. Thank you for coming out this evening. Welcome to the TED Theatre here in the Catalyst, a fantastic new, all singing, all dancing, all shiny venue that we're very pleased to be at this evening for Mayor's Question Time. Hello there.
Could you speak a little more slowly, please? I didn't get your name.
Absolutely will, my friend. Thank you very much for pointing that out. I'm excited to be here. That's why I'm speaking too quickly. I will slow down. My name's Carl Kennedy. Carl, please do call me Carl. This evening, I'm here to host your questions. This is the fifth event, the fifth Mayor's Question Time that we've held. The first one was in person. It was pre-pandemic, and it was over at Hexham, at the Queen's Hall Theatre in Hexham. And Jamie and I were on stage there at the Queen's Hall. The next three events, of course, we had to take them online because of the pandemic, because of COVID. So we had three events that we've had using the power of Zoom and social media, and we hosted a similar event there online. So this is the fifth event, and it's here in person. It's great to be back and have some folks in the room so we can take your questions. We can hear more than just two voices speaking. Some people in the room are going to ask their questions in person. There are some folks that can't be here this evening, so I'll read those questions for them and on their behalf. And we'll hear what Jamie has to say about several subjects through the evening. It is being broadcast live online right now. There's a camera at the back of the room there. It won't be catching any of you in the room. Don't worry. You are maybe perhaps the top of your head at worst, but you are not on view to the internet. But I'd like to say hello to everyone watching, whether you're at home, at work, or wherever you're tuning in. Thanks for joining us this evening. So as I say, welcome. I'm just going to put my mask back on while we put our hands together and welcome to the stage, please, our Mayor, Mr. Jamie Driscoll. Oh, Jamie, we're doing elbows, fist bumps, we're not quite sure. Let's take a seat. Thank you very much. Now, as ever, I'd like to just very briefly start with the hello, Mr. Mayor. It's weird calling a personal friend of mine Mr. Mayor, but Mr. Mayor, how would you like everyone to address you this evening? We'll cover that one first.
Well, I promised I wouldn't talk about Peppa Pig, so let's just go with Jamie.
Just Jamie, brilliant. Now, I've laterally flowed today. I know that I'm all clear. I am masking up while I'm moving around the room, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining in and keeping our colleagues and our friends here in this space safe and wearing your masks when you are walking around. We very much appreciate that. Two vaccine, I presume, Jamie? You've got two vaccines?
And the booster jab.
And the booster.
Oh, yes.
So you've got three triple in the bag. You're triple vaxxed. I look forward to mine in a few weeks' time. How are you? How have things been since I've seen you? I mean, this is the first time we've been in person for one of these events for what feels like forever.
It is interesting. I mean, we've been talking about COVID there, Carl, and the effect that that has had, to the extent that we've very hard to remember life pre-COVID. And very recently, in fact, just last week, there was a showing. For the first year in office, people were following me around with cameras. It was a documentary crew. And it was a little bit like being stalked, because I wasn't entirely sure when I was being filmed. And so that was shown, again, because it was a while before people would get back together in cinemas last week. And it was like watching history. Aside from the fact that I had fewer wrinkles on my face, and I think I had the same amount of hair I've had for many years. But the things we did, the spaces were in, the way we engaged, and of course my kids are about a foot shorter.
Yeah. So much has changed.
It is interesting, having gone from walking in the first day, where we had literally nothing. We didn't even have pens for the whiteboard, and then turning that into an organisation that could deliver, and then seeing a lot of the things that we've done. So that's fantastic. I am also looking forward to a wee bit of a break at Christmas.
Absolutely, I bet you are. But you say you're feeling a little haggard. You're feeling your wrinkles right now because you've been so busy. But I have to say you're looking very well, looking very dapper this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much.
With a tie on this evening. I am bereft of tie. You may note. It's not really how I roll generally in life. I'm not a tie person. But you're wearing a tie. You're going to keep that on for the evening? What do you think? Would we like Jamie to relax a little more and take his tie off?
It's funny, isn't it? So, in the run-up to my election, The Guardian wrote an article on me. One of the reporters came, spent a day with me, and he referred to me as an articulate scruff. Unlike other politics, and he really knows his stuff and all the rest of it. But so, like you, I don't normally go with it, but it is an interesting. There's some things I'm very good at. There's some things I'm really not. I can't sing, and I have zero understanding of fashion taste or what's appropriate. So I think it is an interesting. Actually, I'm a big advocate of democracy. So we can maybe do a show of hands.
Tie or no tie? Should he keep his tie on? Quick show of hands. Keep it on. Fantastic. We don't need to see you stripped, Amy. That's not what we're here for. And I may point out as well that we're both wearing white ribbons today. For anyone that doesn't know the meaning of the white ribbon and its importance today, would you like to?
Yes, the white ribbon. Well, I mean, it's always been an issue. It's always been an issue for me. You know, my mum was very involved in this sort of work when I was growing up, so it's always been part of my awareness. But with the murder of Sarah Everard, it's been perhaps much more in the news this year. About violence against women and girls. And the white ribbon is the campaign which is for men and boys to tackle violence in women against girls. Because this idea that it's for women to somehow avoid being assaulted and harassed is, I mean, it's just wrong on every level. Doesn't need any superlatives. But it's about promoting actually a more compassionate version of masculinity. It's about how we raise our sons. It's about calling out and certainly never participating in, but never even excusing or tolerating harassment, verbal abuse, and violence against women and girls. And so it is wonderful as a campaign because, you know, so many campaigns where we're dealing with oppression, you know, I do feel it's right to give the voice to the people who are being oppressed. You know, the last thing you want is, you know, grey bearded folks like us saying, we know what you need, because it's not true, we don't. But it is great that there's a campaign where men voluntarily are participating as allies in this.
Brilliant. There's a large event, thank you very much. Absolutely right. There's a fantastic event that's been organised by the TUC on Saturday in Newcastle, the Reclaim the Streets. I believe it's 4 o'clock, the start of the march at the monument.
I know, and I'm good. I'm not going to be able to be there because I'm away chairing an Anglo-German summit. But the first Reclaim the Night march was in 1977 in Leeds, and it was a women-only march. And I was on it.
Amazing.
At the age of 7. My mum had taken me.
Brilliant.
And I just remember everybody being taller than me. That's my only memory of it.
So brilliant. I mean, I'm personally taking my daughter down to the event on Saturday, and I think that's going to be a fantastic event. And I think anyone who's listening here is here in the room. If you can make it on Saturday, I would really strongly recommend getting down there. It's going to be a fantastic event. You've been keeping us all in touch with what's going on through your weekly articles that you write in the newspaper, your weekly videos that you release for us, keeping us abreast. And of course, these Mayor's Question Times, these are a continuation of your chance to let everyone know what's been happening, what you're up to, what your team are up to. So if you don't mind, a wee catch up since the last time we saw each other. What's been happening at the mayoral office?
Yeah, there's a lot of work going on about devolution. We've seen the integrated rail plan come out, which was just terrible for the north. It doesn't give, particularly in the northeast, doesn't give us anything we need. So there's a lot of work going on that level, dealing with through the Transport for the North Board, through collaboration with the fellow northern mayors, leading the charge. So some people might have seen some of that in the press recently. And massive support from the business community, from the trade, from everybody, frankly, because you know, when the business community and the politicians and the community groups and the trade unions all agree, you know we're right.
There's nobody fighting that, right?
Yeah, and then everything to do with the creating the jobs. But some of our programs are coming on. So our Green New Deal launches next week, which is fantastic. So this is about financing the change. We all know the change. Actually, not everybody knows, but almost everybody is now on board with this. I think there were a few people that weren't early on, but there needs the finance to be able to do it. And how exactly do you decarbonise buildings and energy? And so there's the mechanisms needed. So we've set that up and we're leading the way. And this is the first one through any mayoral combined authority. So I'm very proud of that. All our work in culture and creative, bringing companies here, working with companies here to create jobs, everything we're doing on adult education, a whole load of things. And I'm sure most of it will come up
in the questions that we're going to answer and stuff. So we've got 10 questions that have been submitted in advance. As I say, some of the questioners are in the room and they'll be asking you. Some of them I'm going to read out because those folks can't be in the room. It's a whole range of questions. What's going to happen is we've got a couple of folks that have handheld microphones. And so if you have a question, if you're in the room and you put your hand up, let me know where you are and I'll direct them to you with the microphone. The microphone is being Clonel wiped in between every point of contact. So once you've before you get the microphone, it will have been cleaned, and after you've used the microphone, before the next person takes it, it will be clean. So just rest assured that you're not just handing germs around the room. So our first question, is someone in the room? Val Jameson's in the room? Where's Val? Hiya, Val. Well, just give us a second while we get the microphone to Val.
Hello.
Thank you, Val.
My question is, I went to see the film the first year at the Tyneside Cinema this week, which was about your first year in office. And it clearly showed the difficulties in juggling home and work, especially in a political role. And as a husband and father, how do you manage those priorities and the added scrutiny of being in politics?
Thank you, Val.
Thanks, Val. I'm not entirely sure is the honest answer. There are a lot of people who have lives that are incredibly busy, who don't have the kind of support that I have. So there are people who are working multiple jobs. There are people with financial difficulties. There are people keeping families together through all sorts of things that happen with tragedies. And I don't have to do any of that. So in one sense, it's much easier than it is for other people. On the other hand, the working hours are ridiculous. And would breach. I don't know why, as a trade unionist, I actually accept them, because let's have a look. See, this year I've tried to have at various points 4 weeks off, and I've had 1 week off. And now a lot of people say, "Oh, it's all right." He says, "But I don't get weekends off or evenings off either." The amount of stuff you have to read is unbelievable. But one of the things that has actually enabled this to work much better is, believe it or not, is Zoom. So even where it's now possible to meet in person, I can do it at home, which means that when I'm finished, sometimes if it's an evening meeting to activists speaking at a panel, an event or something like that, or just a call to someone, because busy people, again, it's quite hard to get them through the day, and you say, "Well, I'll call you tonight," and you do it, and then 8 o'clock, but then I'm at home at 8:01, and get to spend some time with the family. And there are lots of things we do, and the other side of it is keeping fit, because like a lot of people through lockdown, all my clothes shrunk. And it's common knowledge I'm very active in terms of speaking out on climate emergency. So I got rid of my car, and I cycle places and walk places. And that is actually so good, not just for your physical health, but for your mental health. Because you actually have those little bits of time where you're just walking along, hearing the birds sing, feeling the icy northern wind in your face, and or the sun shining, or wherever it is. And I think that really does help. But the other side of it is I have an awesome family, and I think that came across in the film. Caroline, my wife, is brilliant, massively supportive. My sons, they see less of me than the one that occasionally, it is something that is a bit of a sacrifice all around for the family. But we still spend lots of time together. We still do lots of things together. We go places. And we were here for the Wreath lecture recently, which I was invited to. So I brought Leon, my son, and Nelson, my son. Sometimes we're invited to come to live theatre. And very kindly, Nelson was invited to come along with me. So it's great. So they get to do things with me, and they get to feel like, "Oh, I'm with Dad," and being a grown-up, sort of thing. And I'm not going to embarrass him, but Leon's here tonight as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I mean, it is difficult. I think it's difficult for anyone who is self-employed or runs their own business. Lots of people are aware of the kind of sacrifices lots of people across society make. But I think particularly when you're trying to affect change and trying to improve people's quality of life, that perhaps yours has to take a dive while you are in that position, and that's quite difficult.
It's the scrutiny part that Val did allude to, where... And I think every politician who tries to do anything, for good or ill, in my opinion, people have different opinions on what is good and ill, gets it. And you can look at any article in, the Chronicle, and then below the line, you've got people saying things that have no connection with reality, who've never met you, who don't know what they're talking about. And that actually happens, because you're a politician, you're more in the public eye, but it actually happens to anyone on there. So Brendan Foster, sort of regional treasure, has been fantastic for the North East. They were talking about insurance for the Great North Run, and there was abuse on there for him. Oh, bloke, he's just in it for the money. And I think that's the standard thing as you get. Oh, you don't know what you're doing, and all the rest of it. So
it's one of my basic rules in life is do not read the comment section on a Chronicle article online because it is full of people that just want to vent, and they've got a lot of vitriol and they're angry for many reasons. Ours is not the reason why they're angry, but they are angry at those people that they see in front of them, telling them that things need to change, telling them that that their lifestyle needs to be improved in a way that someone else thinks. All that kind of stuff.
And the letters can be interesting.
You get lots of physical letters to the office?
We occasionally get physical letters. They're mostly digital one way or another. But I did get one letter from a man saying, I should stop behaving childishly and using the name Jamie. I should call myself James. So, when you've got people like that, you just got to laugh.
Can't win, can you? Yeah. Boris is fine though, right? Because that's his real name, surely. Brilliant. So thank you for your question there, Val. It was a fantastic film, and if you haven't seen it, I would take a look at it. It's brilliant stuff. Gives you a real insight into everything you've been through, everything you had been through at that stage when the film was made. So thank you very much for that. So the second question we've got, it's from James Hasty. James is here. He's got a question he submitted for us. We'll just wait for the microphone. Thank you, James. Sorry.
Particularly for the people at home.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello there. Thank you.
What are the next steps in your plan to bring affordable housing to north of the Tyne, and how would it look over the next 5 to 10 years?
No, that's a really good question. Affordable housing is a cornerstone to pretty much everything we need to achieve. So if people are insecure about their housing, not necessarily homeless, I was watching with the family Sorry We Missed You the other day, the Ken Loach film, and one of the drivers for that character in the film, who's based on an amalgam of real stories, was they keep being asked to move every year because they're in private rented accommodation. So there's a lot beyond just building new houses that needs to happen. We don't have any housing powers, so there's a limit to what we can do. What we have secured from government is a brownfield housing fund. And this, I probably shouldn't say kill two birds with one stone, because in the interest of biodiversity, but this solves a number of problems at the same time. There are a lot of sites that the market won't unlock because, if there was a former factory on there, it needs clean up and it makes it too expensive. So the Tyne brand factory at Tynemouth on North Shields, Fourth Yards in Newcastle, various other places, a lot of the work on Scotswood, because it's too steep, it requires big retaining walls, major engineering works, and so people don't build on them. The fact that we've been able to secure that money from central government to open up those sites means those houses are being built, and some have been built already. Some up at Commissioners Quay and Blythe, for example. And that allows us some leeway. We don't have the legal powers to compel house builders to do anything, but we can say we need a certain proportion of this. We need some of these things. And at Newbiggin Hall in Newcastle, for example, are going up a collection of houses that are directly for people who need much more accessible properties as a result of disability. So they're getting built now. The next phase is we have signed a memorandum of understanding with Homes England, because this was all devolved from, not devolved, it's all sort of kept by central government in a quango called Homes England, and they decide this. So we've been working with them through our housing and land board. We've set up the programs to get the pipeline of investments that are needed, and it'll be, hopefully, fingers crossed, part of a new devolution deal where we'll get additional funding to do that. And so that's what we're going to do in terms of additional homes being built. We're working with all our registered providers, people like Carbon Homes, Benicia, wonderful organisations who take their social responsibility fantastically seriously to make sure that these things are happening. There are some things that I would very much like to see a change in the law on, particularly to do with council house receipts and councils actually having the power to build council houses. I see no likelihood that central government is going to change that, unfortunately. I think that's going to require a change of government. And as a Labour politician, you won't be surprised to hear me say that. So that's the trajectory. And the other thing that we need to do in terms of affordable housing, and there's a lot to do with retrofitting housing, that's a different question perhaps, is there needs to be proper regulation of the private rented sector. There are many landlords who take their responsibility seriously. Unfortunately, there are many who don't, either because they don't have the skill and the experience, and they might just have one house and they never look at it, and it's dealt with by a letting agency who perhaps have no long-term interest in the success of that property. And there are some, inevitably, who are pretty venal and are just in it for the money, and who don't treat people well and don't maintain the standard of their properties. And I think that's something that, were we to get those powers, we could work with it. We'd work very responsibly with the landlords, we'd make sure it was in everybody's best interest. But at the end of the day, unless people have secure homes, everything else is going to be difficult.
Thank you very much. It's interesting you say that. It seems an eternal renter. I've never owned a property. I don't find myself in a position in my life where I can do that. That's by the by. But I do find that renting and the private renting sector, I do live in Newcastle, I live in Heaton, so of course we've got a huge student population, fantastic for the local economy. I'm not knocking that at all. But what happens with the housing and the pricing of housing, because of course a landlord can convert one of the downstairs living spaces into a bedroom. There can be multiple bedrooms upstairs, putting in dividing walls and making larger rooms into 2 smaller rooms and so on. So they can get a lot more money by having 6, 7 students than a family of 3, 4, 5 living in there. And that's one of the problems that we come up against. And I know you don't have the powers to make those changes, but it is interesting that you take that into the whole overarching picture of affordable housing and like you said, housing that people feel safe and have longevity, and they know they can set down roots, and they know they can make a difference in their local community because they are going to live there for an amount of time. That's great.
It is. You're talking about central Newcastle there, but affordability is actually a big issue in rural Northumberland. It's a massive issue. If you look at somewhere like Beadnell up the coast, the earnings to house price ratios are about 30. Well, house price to earnings ratio is 13 to 1. That's the same as central London. Yeah. Because there's a demand for second homes. So the people who are growing up there can't afford to live there anymore. And this is something that we're working up. And through our Housing and Land Board, convening again with partners. It's always everything we do. We're trying to bring as many people as possible, bringing the experts, bringing people with lived experience in terms of what we're doing to convene on homelessness and bring everybody together to perhaps amplify voices.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, and thank you for your question, James. So our next question, our third question, fourth question, is from Kevin Irving. Kevin's in the room. Hello, Kevin. How are you? If you just bear with us while we get you the microphone, my friend. Thank you for your patience. Brilliant.
Cheers, Carl. Thanks, Jamie, for taking the question. My question is really about the name itself, North of Tyne Mare. Now, originally when the whole project was set up, it was supposed to be a lot larger, wasn't it? It was south of Tyne, north of Tyne. Are there any ongoing talks to get the area expanded? Talks, for instance, with Gateshead Council, Sunderland Council, that sort of thing. In particular, I'm concerned about the fact the government hasn't announced the release of any transport funds for the North East. It did so for the North West, did so for Birmingham. Surprisingly, no mention of the North East at all. I'm concerned that's to do with this. They won't release the funds until the area is north and south. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin.
Where to start? I mean, this has got a long history, and we're only here till 8:30. Want to take the other question, so might be a whistle-stop tour. The region initially had discussions about coming together, and this mayoral combined authority would have been launched, including what's called the LA7 locally. So it's the 3 authorities north of the river, Northumberland, North Tyneside and Newcastle, who are now part of the North of Tyne Combined Mayoral Authority, and there's too many words in that for a start. Then south of the river, you've got Durham, but you've also got in Tyne and Weir, Gateshead, South Tyneside and Sunderland, because not everybody's aware of where council boundaries are. Now that failed for various reasons. Some people had genuine concerns that it was going to be a vehicle for cuts, that they didn't want it. It also failed, I think, to some extent, due to a failure of diplomacy. So as soon as I was elected, I started speaking to everybody south of the river. So the short answer to your question is yes, there's been discussions ongoing since the moment I was elected and started doing a tour and talking to everybody. And it's fair to say people were in a very different place. And there's been a lot of discussions. I have a rule that no matter who I'm talking to, if it's a private discussion, it stays private, otherwise people stop talking to you and you don't get anywhere. But I can tell you those things that are close to the public domain. Back in, must be February 2020, I might have the exact date wrong. So this was when I was in the Treasury, in the Chancellor's office. This is back when Sajid Javid was Chancellor, so it gives you an idea of how long ago that was. It wasn't long, but I collared some junior ministers when I was there and started talking about it. In fact, we found out that this, what is now called the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, CRUSTS, that you referred to, was going to happen. And this was to be a £4.2 billion pot, which the mayoral combined authorities outside of London could get a share of. Now, the Tyne and Wear Metro is by far the single biggest public transport asset that exists in the Northeast. And for obvious reasons, it has to have the whole of the Tyne and Wear authorities, at least, involved in a mayoral combined authority to get those powers devolved to a mayor. Because you can't change the governance of a train as it goes over the Metro Bridge, the Queen Elizabeth Bridge, isn't it, that one, as it crosses the Tyne. So I said to them, can you leave the door open for us? Can you kind of put ours in the fridge, metaphorically, so that if we do come together, we can get our share of it? And had some discussions with ministers, and we agreed. And it actually, that was published in the budget on March the 11th, 2020, that we would have that option. Now, that was reconfirmed in the budget later that year. A lot of things got put back because of COVID. Yeah, that's a reasonable excuse for central government to delay some things. We've got to accept that. And we'd started discussions. So in September last year, September 2020, all of the local authority leaders and me met with the local government minister about how we're going to take this forward. I've had a number of other discussions with Treasury ministers about what might be in that deal. But I don't represent the authority south of the Tyne. So every time I say things like, well, they should and it would be good, it has a tendency to unsettle people, which is the last thing I want when I want trust to be building in the region, so we come together. But we made significant progress, and then in July this year, our Prime Minister, in the middle of a speech, said, oh, and we might offer county deals to people who want them. And so he says, if anyone's got a better idea, email me. You know, his speech writers, you can imagine what they're... So County Durham have elected that they are going to pursue that. And there may be progress on that, there may be not. That's for them to work out. So consequently, it's fair to say that we are in active discussions now. I would like to see us reach a conclusion on these discussions quite soon, so we can unlock the transport money. There are a series of letters that have come back from ministers saying, yes, you will get this if. And the position is, if Sunderland, Gateshead and South Tyneside join with the North of Tyne Combined Authority, I've made it quite clear it will be the North of Tyne Authority changing its boundaries, changing its members. You know, obviously we want the ideas and the input and the priorities of the people from the South as well. But it won't be a long process of closing down the North of Tyne, starting over. I'm not going to do that, because we're doing far too much good work. But this also has to appeal to Northumberland. So there are lots of things we can do with transport in Northumberland. Certainly the buses are shocking in many places. But also the East Coast Main Line. If we get the extra capacity on the East Coast Main Line, we can do things like having more trains stopping in rural Northumberland. We can build a station at Belford to serve sea houses in those areas. Yes is the short answer. That was the long answer I gave you there. But in terms of the name, now the name was decided, no saying the name was decided before I even decided to run for mayor. Prudder is south of the river. Hexham is south of the river. So North of Tyne doesn't quite work for everybody. It's also really, really confusing because we have a North Tyneside as well. And so people often get the two confused. And what I think we should be called is the Great North Combined Authority, because it doesn't define the boundaries. And if Durham want to come in later, they can. But crucially, we've got the Great North Road, we've got the Great North Run, we've got the Great North Hospital. And I want to be able to say to other mayors, yeah, you might be a good Northern mayor, but I'm the Great North Mayor.
It is good. It's fantastic, isn't it? It's fantastic. It's that kind of regional branding, you know, and I know that sounds really kind of businessy, and that's not necessarily what people are interested in, but in terms of taking a voice down to Westminster and being heard by the greater North, I think that lends a greater gravitas, I think. It kind of gives more, and the regional pride and everything that we all feel about being from the Northeast and living in the Northeast and working here. I think the Great North is a great title. I'll be an advocate. I'll vote for that. I've got a related question. It was a question submitted by Anthony Jennings, and Anthony is a mobility scooter user, is an advocate for equal disability rights, is co-chair of the Avanti Accessibility Panel, and he asks, why are Tyne and Wear Metro allowed to get away with having a discriminatory mobility scooter policy, banning disabled scooter users from accessing the metro when every other UK metro and train operator allows them? So it kind of linked to the local transport and the money that we are and are not seeing at the moment. And I just thought I'd link that question in there. I think it's a good way to...
I mean, it is a really important question. You know, there are a number of things that through the North East Joint Transport Committee, to which we don't have transport powers devolved, but this is where we all work together, where there's a fantastic transport plan that's been developed that I've partly shaped with colleagues, and what's called the BSIP, the Bus Services Improvement Plan. And one of the really good things that's in that I think is excellent. We do not have the funding to deliver this at this time, but is that if you wait for a bus and you can't get on the bus for mobility reasons, you know, the bus fleet will be changed, but at the moment you can't get wheelchairs on a lot of buses. That then they will get you a taxi at no extra cost. So that's the sort of thing that really opens up mobility to people. On the specific question about Tyne and Wear Metro, I did ask them this, and you can go on with wheelchairs, powered wheelchairs, but mobility scooters are an issue. And this goes back 40 plus years to the design of the system. If you compare it to a lot of the systems around the country, around Europe for that matter, we've got very narrow platforms in some of our places. And the turning circle doesn't allow mobility scooters in some cases. And I'm told, I've not witnessed this myself, that there have been really potentially fatal accidents that fortunately weren't, where mobility scooters have fallen onto the lines, people have tried to turn them. Wow. And for that reason, they made the decision to ban them. And likewise with some of the access ramps and things like that are too tight, and there were situations where people got stuck. So that is the reason they've given. In addition to that, there are problems with boarding some of the trains. Now, the trains are well past 40 years old now, and they creak and they need to be upgraded, and it's taken far too long to get the money, but we have got the money secured. Those new trains are being built right now. And there's been extensive consultation with mobility groups, access users, people with disabilities, and not just mobility disabilities, sensory disabilities as well, about how to use them. And the new trains have a step that zoom comes out to help people get on and off, so there's not even that little gap between the train and the platform. You know, if you're someone with a stick, for example, that can be potentially extremely dangerous. So the new trains will be much better. But I've asked, does that mean that mobility scooters will be? And they said they will review and test them. One of the difficulties being is mobility scooters vary enormously, including sometimes personal customized changes to them. So if you've got a basket on the front, it might mean you can or can't get in some places. So that is something that we don't have a firm answer on, but they are actively, again, going to be working with people. So that's the...
Yeah, it's being looked at, and the funding is in place to upgrade things, but there are certain things that until huge infrastructural changes are made, it's almost impossible to allow mobility scooters carte blanche onto every metro. Yeah,
and that's because our infrastructure is very old and needs upgrading.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for submitting that question to us, Anthony, online. And thank you. I hope you managed to hear the answer. So we're on to our fifth question, about halfway through the questions once we got to the end of this question. And the question, I believe they're in the room, is Ulrich Freiberger. Is Ulrich here? Potentially couldn't make it. No, Ulrich couldn't make it, so it's fine. I've got his question here, or their question rather. I'll read Ulrich's question for you here, Jamie. It's a question in two parts. The first part, what should employers, DFDS Seaways Limited, North Shields, do, and what is their legal responsibilities in contributing to reduce, avoid, and manage and monitor COVID-19 transmissions? This is about COVID-19 I don't know why there's a particular emphasis on DFDS seaways, but they are mentioned in the second part of the question, or the second question, which is what should employers, and again they're mentioned, do, and what are their legal responsibilities in contributing to reduce, avoid, manage, improve CO2 and other environmental impact at the workplace? And how should they be supporting walking and cycling to work? So two questions really there from Ulrich, but let's go with the first one in terms of the legal responsibilities of businesses towards their employees with regards to COVID-19 transmission.
Right. I think this is a matter for central. Well, it is legally a matter for central government in terms of setting these things, but I guess perhaps Ulrich works at DFDS Seaways, but we don't know that. I think rather than go into all the details of what firms are legally required to do, it's probably best to say look online, because the guidance does change. It may change again, and it also changes depending on the nature of the employment and other things. So if I was to try and cite all the regulations, I would probably make some mistakes, and it would also be here for an awfully long time. But one of the things that actually can happen, if you know, and I don't know if this is because Ulrich's mentioned the employer, because perhaps Ulrich might not be happy with an employer, might be misinterpreting that. But one of the most useful things you can do is talk to your trade union, because they'll be right on top of this.
So that's your primary advice. If someone thinks that a business should be doing more to safeguard, and think they have legal requirements to safeguard their employees and obviously their customers, their visitors, however they work, that they could take it up with the trade unions. Are there other outlets for I need to let someone know that this business is not perhaps looking after me?
Yeah. If it comes to these things, then the local Department of Public Health have, and in our region, they're absolutely superb in the way they've been dealing with COVID throughout the pandemic. But there's, I think it's fair to say that there are a huge number of employees that I have dealt with who are really on this, and they're looking after their people. And so I spend a lot of time visiting businesses, talking to people, and they have the testing in place, many of them that I visit. I've got to go, and they've arranged to visit, and they say, "Can I see your COVID pass?" Yeah, of course. So they're making sure that people, even with sort of my role, are up to speed on it. And they have the guidelines and the hand washing and all of these things. So there may be somewhere, I'm sure there are somewhere, some employees who are not doing terribly well, and there always are, sadly.
Undoubtedly.
And a lot of businesses are looking after their customers as well. So,
and I think it perhaps important to note that, of course, the legislation changes, and this time last year it was changing every week. The Prime Minister would get on the telly and be like, we've got to do that this week, have we? We've got to do that this week. I mean, I'm involved in the hospitality industry, and I run a venue, and I knew that I had to watch the news and then start answering questions from all of my staff and all of my customers. What does that mean? What's happening this weekend then? And I'd give us a chance. He's just said it. We're going to have to wait for someone to write what he means from what he's just said.
It was extraordinarily difficult for people to keep up with it, and I have tremendous sympathy for a lot of businesses, particularly hospitality. But also, my wife's a GP, and in primary care, it's often the case that she'll be coming home from work, she'll hear something on Radio 4, and she'll think, I didn't know that, because they hadn't actually told them before they announced it to the public.
At least the information.
In fact, throughout COVID, there were times when we would have meetings appear in our diaries and disappear with ministers about what was going to happen. Were we going to go into tier 3? Were the tiers going to change? All of these things. It was chaotic. It was a difficult time, but I don't think that necessarily warranted quite the chaotic response we did get.
I think
that has made people have this feeling that you're alluding to there, Carl, of I don't even know what the regulations are anymore.
So I think the point I was going to go to was that perhaps speak to a business. If you think a business's practices, a business you work for, as a customer, as a visitor to a business, I think perhaps in the first instance, do you know this is the current legislation? Do you know you shouldn't be doing that? I think there's a great kind of, especially for small businesses and hospitality, and on the high street or what have you, letting companies know that things change, and you may not have seen that.
In
the first instance, rather than immediately thinking, I should dob them in, I should get them in to bother.
I think there's also a difference between legal requirement and best practice, and keeping people safe is best practice. And I think there is an element of the public required to do things. I mean, I travel on the metro all the time. You might not realise it, but you have agreed when you get a ticket, or if you've got a pop card, as I have, you have agreed that you will wear a mask on the metro. Now, who knows that? I mean, I know that because I talked to the Joint Transport Committee. But there are some people who do and some people who don't. It's one of these things, if you see people wearing a mask, is it actually going to be a massive, you might have breathing condition or something, but for anybody else, it's not an inconvenience. Just wear your mask. Just do your best. If someone looks uncomfortable and is backing away from it, give them the space. Yeah. You don't know what their health situation is, and it comes back to try and be considerate to people.
And so, of course, the second question is, and again, because there are legal responsibilities, and he highlights the word legal. Obviously, if a company has legal responsibilities, that's something between central government and that business. But what about the impact, the improving CO2 emissions from businesses that are based in the region? I know that you're doing a lot of work with businesses about that. Maybe just for Ulrich, just let us, and for all of us, let us know where things are in that kind of respect.
Yeah, well, legal requirements are minimal. And for all the government's pushed on a climate emergency, in terms of the things that have to be done are really quite limited, unfortunately. So there will be some changes at some point to do with house building, but we're not seeing them come through yet. There will be some changes with internal combustion engines being phased out, but not for another 9 years. And they've cut air passenger duty, which I think is totally counterproductive when it comes to dealing with a climate emergency. In terms of what companies have to do, so it's really quite limited. But there are many companies doing terrific work. So in the Northeast, we have the Northeast Climate, I'll get the acronym wrong, but the Northeast Climate Coalition doing work. There's a lot of companies doing work through the Northeast Local Enterprise Partnership and the business organisations. And there's work that we convene as well as all the programs we do. So, we're investing heavily in offshore wind. We are supporting companies to grow. We have a number of programs helping small businesses come up with decarbonisation solutions. Next week, we're launching our Green New Deal. So this is a fund that we've put £9 million into, but we're leveraging a lot more money. We've also got an extra £9 million coming in, which is about something that's called patient capital. So there's a lot of firms and public sector organisations and sort of third sector organisations would love to reduce their heating bills. They would love to regenerate some renewals, but they don't have the capital to do it. Their number one priority is keeping their business going. They're not going to blow their operating budget on some solar panels, for example, or heat pumps, whatever else it might be. So we give them that money in a patient way, and if they don't have the resources, we take it on an equity basis. But on a very patient, we're not trying to control their business. The savings they make from that, they are then able to pay it back and we get the money back. Right. So we're decarbonising, we're creating jobs, and these are the innovative solutions that we need. And we get to spend the money over and over again. So that's how, that's a real example of being bang on in terms of social responsibility, bang on in terms of climate responsibility and financial sustainability that's go with it. There is a way when we're doing this.
Fantastic, great work. Well, I hope in part that answers Ulrich's question, or questions rather, and thank you for submitting the question. I hope you heard the answer at home or at work, wherever you are. So we're now on to our next question. Brian Dickinson, who's a branch secretary in the Labour Party, Kenton Labour Party. He asked this question. I don't believe you're in the room, are you, Brian? Oh, you are here. Hello, Brian. I didn't know you'd make it. Thank you, fantastic. If you just wait for the microphone again, Brian, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. There we are. Thank you, Brian. Oh, is it on? We've got a technician in attendance. It will be with you very shortly. It's just so that everyone watching from their computers or where have you can hear the questions as well.
Hello. Hi.
There you are. Thank you,
Hi,
Brian.
Jamie. Straight to the point. There was a letter in yesterday's Guardian stating that the government treats the North with little respect as we have little or no political or financial power. They go on to state that we need a regional government to solve this. What's the Mayor's views on this?
Thanks, Brian. I can imagine you can guess my views on this, particularly if anybody saw my contribution to Transport for the North Board yesterday.
First time perhaps I've seen you lose your cool a little bit at the end of your section there, and when I watched the video back I was like, oh, Jamie.
Yeah. It's not something I like to do, and it's
No, of course not. Of course not.
No, I mean, I didn't raise my voice particularly, but Britain is the single most centralised country of any advanced economy. We've got a legacy of empire. We are not an empire. The British governmental structures have not changed since London was the administrative centre of a global empire, which is not that long ago. You've got to remember it. When Clement Attlee was Prime Minister, India was still part of the British Empire. So we've seen some baby steps with Scottish devolution, with the Welsh devolution and the agreement in Northern Ireland. And then we had the London mayoralty created in the year 2000, so that's now 21 years old. But really, very, very recently, we've had some devolution in the English regions. And for those of us who, I mean, I was born in 1970, grew up in the 70s, but particularly the 80s, when we saw what was happening to the industry in the northeast, and the failure to replace shipyards and steelworks and wagon works and coal mines with any sort of industrial policy was, you know, it was just nearly again, but it was not good for our region. And we've seen the scars of that in terms of ill health in our region to do with entrenched poverty and reduced life chances for people. So the idea that the integrated rail plan comes out and there's some things we might do at some point. If you get a city region deal, we might look at opening the Leamside line, is at best negligent, but frankly it's contemptuous. Now, if you look at what devolution has done, so in 2.5 years, with a budget of only £20 million a year, which doesn't even cover what has been cut from the authorities in the north of Tyne. We've got a jobs pipeline of 4,400. We've got a child poverty prevention programme. We've changed the nature of qualifications here to the extent that, I think that might be a question later, so I'm not going into the detail of it, but we've gotten more people educated and qualified. We've set up community hubs. We are doing so much in terms of directly empowering communities. And the amount of money that we've returned to Treasury through the jobs created is about 3 times greater than the money we're spending. It's about generating wealth here. I've worked with a lot of people. I always try to work across party and build allies wherever possible. And I wrote a paper on what's called regional wealth generation, which is about fiscal devolution, which is about getting us an investment fund of £500 million so we can directly invest in startups and scale-ups and small businesses who find it very hard, some of them, to get the patient capital they need to grow. And if we can borrow at base rate, that's a fund that will pay for itself, and we'll be able to pay all the money back to Treasury. And in the meantime, we've created jobs. For every job we create, we're smashing our jobs target out of the park by a factor of 5. And if I can make a political point, anyone who says that the Labour Party doesn't know how to run the economy should come and talk to me, because I know what I'm doing. And those jobs are creating wealth. But we don't get any more from it. If I was running the branch of a global corporation and I'd hit my sales targets by a factor of 5, they would be throwing money at me and say, can you do some more, please? So this is something that's in the paper. Land value uplift, and I've got the rest of the Northern Mayors now. They were at the People's Powerhouse event earlier online. And Andy generously gave me all the credit for it because it's the paper that I've developed and been pushing these ideas. So this is where we put new rail infrastructure in, or other infrastructure, but it was rail we were talking about. So if we open a new line going from Northumberland Park through Cobalt and Silverlink and down to the Royal Quays, if we take one going through Scotswood and going over at the Metro Centre, if as a larger authority we build that Wearside loop going through Washington and Penshaw into joining with the line at South Hilton, so that we've got much better connectivity to our people, that land becomes more valuable. And at the moment it goes to speculators. Why shouldn't we be able to put a charge on that land so that we can fund the very things that are generating wealth and making it valuable? So these are the things that I'm putting out there that have been in our comprehensive spending review bids, that I've spoken to Treasury officials and Treasury ministers about. And I got Jim O'Neill, who was the former Northern Powerhouse Minister, wrote the foreword for that paper for me. Andy Haldane, who leads the RSA, published it. Now, Andy's now working in central government on secondment, so he has to say officially neutral. And so that's the sort of things that we should have. It's not just going to London and doing an Oliver Twist and saying, please, sir, can I have some more? I don't believe in levelling up. I believe in levelling beyond. I don't accept the idea that the North East has to be poor. I don't accept we have to be the second relation. We can generate wealth here. I want us, and I'll tell you what we have accomplished. For the first time ever, the unemployment in the north of Tyne now, not the wider North East, just the north of Tyne, is now down to the national average. I want us to be below average unemployment. I want to eliminate unemployment. You're going to get some frictional unemployment as people move job to job, but I want to eliminate unemployment. I want us to have higher than average wages, and there's no reason why we can't. But it will never, ever happen as long as we're asking it from London. We need the powers here. Now, I'm not an advocate of full independence for the North or full independence for Scotland. I think it's, we need a common foreign policy and lots of other things, common defence policies. But I really sympathise with the people who call for that. And we want as much powers to the functional economic areas as possible, and then work federally across the North for those things that work better, such as Northern Powerhouse Rail. So these are the things that I want. These are the things I've been calling for, and these are the things that I'm going to continue to push for. And every increment along that way, and it's, you know what we've got to become masters of our own destiny.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Happy with that answer? To quote a ridiculous science fiction film from the 80s, I'd buy that for $1. I really would. That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Jamie. And thank you, Brian, for your question. We're going to move straight on because time is marching inexorably forwards. Craig, we've got Craig Bogan. Craig? Is Craig here? Hello, Craig. Again, thank you for waiting for the microphone.
Hi, can you hear me? So, sorry I missed your Powerhouse earlier and the People Powerhouse. But yesterday, Michael Marmot was present, and he mentioned that he's working with Andy Burnham for obviously his Build Back Fairer. And within the North East, we have some of the highest deprivation and from a social point of view. But will you work with Sir Michael Marmot as well, just like Andy Burnham, to try and help the people of the North East?
Thanks, Craig. Yeah.
Thank you, Craig.
Sorry to take the wind out of your sails, but we are. So the team have already spoken to Michael Marmot and his team on the trajectory that we're already on this work. But it's worth perhaps pointing out at the beginning that the remit that Greater Manchester has is very different from the North of Tyne. So health and public health are devolved in Greater Manchester and they're not in the North of Tyne. So the degree of work and the specifics of the work will be different. But I was on a panel with Sir Michael Marmot, and I think was Donna Hall at the People's Powerhouse panel yesterday, and Donna's wonderful in the work she does as well. And on that, I was talking about the Good Work Pledge that we do, and Michael was incredibly generous in the praise he gave it. This is absolutely spot on. Everything that needs to be happening is in there. But there's, if you look at his papers, there's I think he lists about 6 criteria. So one is giving children the best start in life. Now that is obviously massively multifaceted in the work that's doing it. One of the things that we're doing in North of Tyne is we've put 900,000 into our child poverty prevention strategy, which is working in schools with helping people to do these things. So that's one thing that we're already doing on that one. When it comes to, I think, maximising the capabilities of children, young people and adults, we have our adult education budget devolved. And this is working with people in so many different ways to get the skills they want. But another one is we have, it's an interesting thing, for the first year, it's all me trying to do things and get things together and teams and start projects and get things agreed through my cabinet. And then after that, it's coming thick and fast, the things being delivered. One of which is just up the road there is Newcastle, the Murray House Centre. And that's doing outreach, again, particularly with communities and kids who've not had a particularly great educational trajectory and helping them get greater skills, greater confidence, and things like that. Fair employment is one of his core priorities. Now, our Good Work Pledge has 5. One is making sure that people are properly remunerated. So it's the real living wage, not just the national minimum wage. And by the way, the real living wage, of course, applies to everybody of whatever age. I think it's ridiculous that at the age of 24, you don't get paid what you're 25. I can see no justification for that whatsoever. Some people say, oh yeah, but you're more experienced. Well, yeah, then do it on experience. It's quite possible to be a very experienced 22-year-old if you've done the job for 6 years. It's about making sure that we have fair employment contracts with no fire and rehire or 0 hours. Because it's not just the minimum wage. A lot of people struggle to get enough hours, or they don't know what hours they're getting from week to week. How can you possibly plan your finances on that basis? To make sure that people have proper mental health support at work, to make sure that people listen to at work, engaging with trade unions, and additionally to make sure that people have a career path, so you get skilled and trained at work as well. So that's what we're doing on the fair employment side. On the healthy standard of living, that's about earning more, which is partly covered by the living wage, but that's the jobs we're creating, and good jobs. And by the way, if you create some very highly paid jobs, not ridiculously paid jobs, just highly paid jobs, then that does raise wages overall. Not least because there's more people that spend money locally. If you create billionaires, it actually does nothing to create wages, to increase wages. Healthy, sustainable places and communities. So through our Space Hive, there's loads of things that we're doing where we directly listen to communities. In fact, we don't listen to them, we empower them. And we say, you come forward with some ideas. So the latest round has been on zero carbon, zero poverty. And there's some fantastic initiatives come through when you say to communities, you tell us what you think you can do, and we'll give you the money. If you get the support from your community. So then we know there's widespread support. And these have been all sorts of things, vegetable gardens, altered meeting is for people who've lost sense and taste. This is pre-COVID, but also a lot of people with COVID have a similar effect in long COVID, and it's helping them through support. Beekeeping in the Meadowell, again, and this is about community cohesion and well-being, so many things on that. And the big one is ill health prevention. Now, we don't have that devolved. That there is an element of it through Public Health England, there's an element of it through the local authorities, and we do convene and collaborate through that. But one of the biggest things, and this is something else that annoys the hell out of me, is as a country, we're quite happy to spend and argue about how much we should be spending on fixing problems. And we don't seem to spend the money on preventing them in the first place. And we see that with crime. Every kid that's excluded from school is now at risk of falling into the orbit of criminality. When people come out of prison, we don't look after them properly. We don't find them the employment to get their lives back on track. Ill health, obesity, for a lot of people who have a lifestyle where they can afford to pay the bills, there's no worries there for them, still are so busy running around or sitting in cars getting stressed because our public transport isn't good enough and the active travel isn't good enough to support them. And these are the things that I've put into comprehensive spending reviews, that I've put into the regional wealth generation paper, and that I've been speaking to ministers about, so that we can start to pilot these things. So that the budget, if we look at something like obesity as an example, that's going to be predicted to cost 49.9 billion a year by 2050. So the Northeast transport footprint, the LA7, that's 1.65 billion. And our transport budget over that footprint, 160 million. We're spending a tenth on transport. We're going to be spending fixing a preventable problem. So I'm saying the problem is that the NHS can't spend money on transport. And if you spend money on transport, you can't get the money back. So what we need is the accountancy system to be able to do that. And that's what I'm trying to work with central government. So that's the approach we're taking.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Happy with that answer? Yeah. Fantastic. And thank you very much for your question.
Cheers, Craig.
Brilliant. Thank you. And thank you for your work you've been doing. Seeing what you get up to for a living. Thank you very much for everything. The next question we've got is a question that's been submitted from Margaret Mound, and I know Margaret's not in the room unless she's turned up too. She hasn't. And so I'm going to read Margaret's question for you. It's related to, just a bit of background because the question doesn't mention it exactly, it's related to divestment from fossil fuels by the Tyne and Wear Pension Fund. The pension fund that has representatives who manage it from 5 local authorities, including Northumberland, Newcastle and North Tyneside. The question is, what steps have you taken to make divestment actually happen? Have you put forward any questions to the Pensions Committee members on the need for urgent divestment, or taken other steps? With what result? Presumably your staff are still paying into the pension fund, so is the statement that we will not invest in fossil fuels extraction a goal rather than a current reality?
Well, let's pick up that last part first. There's a difference between what we invest in and what we legally do with a pension scheme from the staff. So this is the Tyne and Weir Pension Fund. Now, that is going to be, the government guidelines are going to put that into the pooled pension fund, the Borders to, I might have the details wrong, the Borders to Coast Pension Fund by 2023. And there are concerns, therefore, about democratic oversight, about, will people be close enough to it? But the North of Tyne, we've got a small team, and our payrolls, our pension things are administered by one of our local authorities. So in this case, it's Newcastle. On some of our democratic and legal services, again, these are outsourced to our local authorities, because there's no point in us setting up a department for 50 odd people. The approach we've taken is a lot of our officers have been working with this to get it through. Now, it's fair to say the progress has not been as fast as I would have liked. In April 2020, the board said that they would have they made an acknowledgement that climate change is a risk of investments, and it is, investing in oil and coal. I think there's around 257 million invested in it out of a fund that's, I think, 11, 12 billion, which is still far, far too much, shouldn't be any. And I think in November, they accepted that they will have new investment beliefs, and they've put 600 and odd million into a new fund, because it should also be ethical, but it also needs to be investing in the local area, which is, I think, where pension funds should be doing. I'm not a huge fan of the idea that pension funds are investing in, I don't know, things that are creating jobs when they could be creating jobs here. Let's use the local capital, let's recycle it in the local area. So what we need to do, and what I will do is I'll send a letter with all these specific things to the chair of the pension fund and the members. We're not represented on it as North of Tyne. Our staff, of course, they have to get pensions. Of course, we should pay, and it's a good contributory pension fund. So our staff do pay into that, but that's not the same as us investing in something. It really isn't. So I'll write to them. I'll get the answer, and we'll presumably we've got Margaret's information.
I think if she's
submitted a question,
we'll have an email from her,
and we'll get the answer and share that with her.
And we'll share that with the wider. I'm sure one of your articles that you'll write, or one of your videos, you'll keep us updated on that, because it's big and important stuff. So thank you very much for your question, Margaret, and I hope wherever you are that you're keeping safe, and that answer pleased you. Thank you very much. So we're moving on now. Next question is in the room. We've got Nigel Howard. Yeah, hello, Nigel. He's back there. Brilliant.
Hi, Jimmy.
Hello, Nigel.
Two-part question. How much money has been spent on attracting companies into the area, and how many actual jobs where wages being paid have actually been created, especially when £680,000 was given to a multi-international company to bring 100 jobs to Newcastle over a 3-year period?
Thanks, Nigel. Yeah. So inward investment is part of the strategy we're taking about creating jobs, but it's only one part of it. This is the one that brings large firms here who haven't been investing here and wouldn't have invested here otherwise. So this includes firms already like Verisure, who are based at Quorum Business Park in North Tyneside, Explore, ThoughtWorks, Monster Labs. It's either ThoughtWorks or Monster Labs you're referring to specifically, because they're both very similar size, so I'm not sure which. So is it Monster Labs? Monster Labs, yeah. And I don't want to sound massively pedantic, but your phrase was given to, it's important to note the way we do this. So all of the jobs that we create, we've got a very strict criteria from Treasury about how we manage them. And we have to go through something called the Gateway Review process, which shows how we've spent our money and is it good value for money. And unlike perhaps a lot of political phrases where there's hyperbole, and this will lead to unicorns in every meadow, ours only count if there's an actual job that somebody's been employed in for at least 1 year. It's a full-time job equivalent, and our investment made it happen. It wouldn't have happened otherwise. So that's very different from, a Freeport will create 60,000 jobs. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But there's a lot of people claiming that share of that. And this is all, every single job has an actual person with an NI number attached to it. Now, it's all data protected, so that information never comes out. But there is that traceability there. Now, the process is on inward investment. Our inward investment fund, we've allocated £10 million. And so far, we've committed nearly 3.3 million to a number of companies. And that's Verisure, 960, Explore 964, and around about 690,000 to ThoughtWorks and Monster Labs. The average salary at Monster Labs is £59,000. So these are really well, that's an average, by the way. So these are really well-paid jobs, and they're going to be based on Grey Street. But the way it works is we only pay the money after the job has been created, and that's in the contract. So we don't give any money to anybody who hasn't created any jobs on that basis. So this is bringing them in. It will create overall about 2,000 jobs. Already people who are in jobs, well, I say already, there's a delay because they send us the returns quarterly. Then we process and amalgamate them. And so there tends to be about a 6-month delay in the figures. And so it's 575 jobs of people within that, if you go back to when that reporting occurred, already in jobs. The pipeline is 4,400. And that doesn't include things like British Vote, doesn't include the supply chain, doesn't include a lot of the other things we're working on yet. These are ones where there's good accountability. And 2,655 safeguarded where companies were struggling, and we've supported them through the pandemic. So that's the answer to the question.
So I'm just going to repeat that just for those that are watching online and whatnot. You'd seen an article, and in that it made it sound like. So just repeat what you're saying there with the microphone. Yeah, fantastic. Just so that folks at home can.
Yeah, just I was going to say, just with the £680,000, it was on either Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and whether it was through North of Tyne or whether it's through Newcastle City Council, it was a way it was put across as though it's £680,000, and then within 3 years we'll have 100 jobs in the centre of Newcastle. When, as you see it, it's not that way through. Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, just very quick, going off the thing, we're obviously in a climate crisis. Why have we not, why is it authority not gone down a route of trying to get people into green jobs and sort of get rid of your better heating in houses and stuff like that?
Yeah, okay. Green jobs. Just on your previous point, we're far too canny. I've got a fantastic team that we've assembled that we wouldn't be giving money to people before the results have been delivered. Not least because I have to answer to it to the Treasury, and I haven't got that kind of cash to make up the shortfall. We on the inward investment, we've got 3.3 million committed already. There's another 2.3 million where. These are at a stage of being commercially confidential because, if a company's thinking of moving here, they don't want it announced because it gives perhaps potentially rivals information, commercially useful information. So there's another 2.3 million going through the work, so we're bringing more through here. Verisure were contracted for 453 jobs. They're actually going to create more than 1,000, and they've expanded to bigger premises. They've only been there for a year, and a lot of the people who came there, by the way, have had pay rises already. They give an average 15% pay rise to their staff. So we make sure that when I talk to these companies, what sort of jobs are you talking about? These are not minimum wage jobs in 0 hours contracts. These are good jobs, otherwise I wouldn't be dealing with them. In terms of the green jobs, there are lots of things we're doing. Some of them are about creating infrastructure. So if we go up to Blythe, for example, Battleship Wharf, wind turbines are getting bigger and bigger. You need bigger cranes, you need stronger hard standing for them. So we're investing in these things to make it available. We're investing in reopening the Swan site. Now that's a wee way down the line because it's there's a lot of work to be done there. It's not going to be this time next year, there'll be jobs there, but we've got a plan for the future. When we look at the offshore industry overall, then we've been working with companies such as Transmission Dynamics, for example, and they hit a growth problem because their premises, they couldn't get more people in it. So we've helped them find new premises and give them some capital up front so that they can move now, because they didn't have the capital available, to create another 50 jobs. So these are medium-sized companies that are benefiting. And we're talking about green jobs. So the Green New Deal Fund, which I mentioned earlier, that's going to be creating jobs with solar panels, with heat pumps, all of the very things you're talking about, Nigel. So you're spot on in identifying that as an opportunity, and that's why we've been doing it. But right down to really small companies. So some of you might know the Cycle Hub on the quayside. The Cycle Hub, you might not realise there's a business runs out of there, sort of just basically rents it as office space, called Saddle Skedaddle, and they run cycling holidays, and yeah, wonderful thing to do, active travel, low carbon, all the rest of it, even some in Northumberland. And one of the things one of the approaches we've taken is with what we call our recovery innovation deal. We've got to give everything a snappy title, lots of words in it. And this is helping small firms create new jobs. And they suffered terribly through COVID, as you can imagine a holiday company would. But they had an ambitious plan to double their turnover, even from their pre-COVID level, but their information systems weren't up to it because it needed to be really specialist and bespoke, and they couldn't afford the big software projects. So we've helped them with some investment to get a developer in, to help them link their customer relationship software with their online software and other information that they do, so they can do that. And that is going to create the grand total of 2 new jobs. Now, this is where, in answer to the question earlier, this is where devolution wins. There is not a hope in hell of central government even bothering to look at something that creates 2 new jobs. But why should it be that small sustainable companies in the north of Tyne can't get the support just because government structures decide that it's too small to look at? That's the level of detail we're going down to.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for your question, Nigel. I hope we've got to the bottom of some of your thinking there and clarification. I think it's about communication. I think that question's more about it read like this, and actually when you say it to me, I get it. You know, yeah. It's one of those situations, it feels like. So thank you very much. We're on to our last question of the evening, Jamie. This is a question from Linda Hoffman, who's somewhere in the room. Hello, Linda. How are you? If you just, again, if you don't mind waiting for the microphone, thank you ever so much. It's winging its way to you. Thank you very much for your patience. Hello, Linda.
Hi. So, Jamie, you've told us a lot about what you've been doing to create some really good jobs, and that's really exciting. But can you tell us a bit more about what's being done to make sure that local people are going to have the skills that are needed to actually do those jobs?
Fantastic question. Thank you, Linda.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I mean, that is such an important subject. Yeah, how long have we got? Because I could bang on for ages now.
We're about 7,
we
8
got
minutes.
the adult evolution. The adult education. I'm going to have a drink of water.
You've said a lot of words without taking any water on board. Well done.
The adult education budget devolved from the 1st of August last year. Now, if you try and think of a time to get something devolved where you've got to start running it, it's hard to imagine a worse time in recent history, because obviously this is about getting people in places together to learn skills. Now, we get the same amount of money as it used to be administered by central government. But even through COVID, we've increased the number of enrolments by 10%. And we've gone from 7.1% of the working age population of the north of Tyne not having any skills, down to 6% in just a year. So these are people now have qualifications to help them get jobs. Now, that's one of the things we've done, and that's a headline. But we're one of the few people who've trained lorry drivers. So that, and we were doing that from July last year. I mean, I don't train them, I don't know how to drive a lorry, but we fund the programs, we convene people and bring them together. Things through our local colleges, our further education colleges, things helping people who've moved to the country or refugees with who are speak English as a second or other language, and helping them be able to become economically productive and economically active. But then there's the things that we do directly with perhaps what we might not think of as education channels and skills channels. But for example, in the Meadowell, we work with organisations there who get people from the local area, and we have this phrase, you know, that's we use when we're talking in shorthand to each other as people furthest from the labour market. And that's a bit of a shorthand. It could be anything. You know, it could be people who've struggled with the criminal justice system, could be people who've had ill health, could be people who've had terrible family problems, could be people who have just struggled educationally and lost confidence. And it can be people who've been caring for a loved one for a long period of time, and that's no longer a caring responsibility, usually, sadly, because the person they're caring for has died. But then of thinking, oh my God, I haven't worked for years, and how am I going to get back into work? We've created a whole number of programs. And one of them, for example, is the one in the Meadowell, where we created out a fantastic kitchen, and it looks like a proper professional kitchen, and people come in and they get the skills, and they get placements, and then they are now qualified to do a job. And that's one of the ways we go through. And then you look at the other end of the scale, in terms of sheer size, where you've got Britishvolt up the way. 3,000 jobs coming in making batteries. And nobody in this region has done that job before. We can go back a long time, maybe light on, but the technology's changed anyway. How the hell do you get 3,000 people to suddenly be skilled and run a factory? Well, again, that's a project that we're working with them on to make sure that people are skilled up. And that's a whole series of finding the people who are even capable of training the people to do this. I mentioned the number of firms we're bringing here in the digital sector. And so there's a program we're working up with the universities, with the businesses, to enable people to get work experience through lots of different companies that they're getting paid for, paid work experience. So the companies get to see the people get to see the companies, and it keeps talented people in the area. So we've got a talent pool coming up. And then you look at, I was talking about the Newcastle United Foundation, who we partner with for the Newcastle United Futures project. And again, this is getting kids in, and it's, sorry, that's terribly patronising, young people in, you know, they are of working age, to do things like develop some coding skills, because people have this sort of, it's not literally true, but that, you know, if you are 20 years younger than me, somehow you were born knowing how to program a computer. It's not true. I was a computer programmer. I was a software developer. And kids are good on the phones, but not necessarily everything else. So there's things like they get them in and get them engaged and happy. Programming little robots to play football up there, and then getting them enthused about it. And then you go right down the other end, where we are dealing with schools, and we've funded, one of the pledges in my manifesto was a world-class climate education. And we partnered with the United Nations programme to make sure that teachers could get accredited as UN climate change teachers. And that was more a convening thing than us doing anything directly in terms of funding. But we are funding at primary level what is called the Climate Heroes Project, which is where kids in primary school get a programme and a teacher coming in with expertise to do things like soil analysis or biodiversity counts. Because, you know, if you're sort of 7, 8, 9, 10, you're not probably going to have skills to do a lot of advanced things. But then in secondary schools, we're working with the Institute of Civil Engineers to get young people the opportunity to solve real world problems in a competition is perhaps the wrong word, but a competition where everybody gets something out of it, because these are real world things where you show your results. And it might be, how do we design bus stops so that there's zero carbon? We talk about zero carbon. You know, well, what about the lights on it? What about where the materials come from? Is there a way we can do it? And young people get to develop those skills. And then on the tertiary level at sixth form, we're working with the universities and the people who teach this. And we've got people might not realise, we've got quite a strong computer games industry in the Northeast. So we're working with them and getting young people in to develop computer games that are climate change simulators. So, you know, where they're playing with public policy and what's the outcome and these things. So again, they're getting the skills, the employers are getting the skills pipelines coming through, and it works for everyone. So this is something we're doing in a massive way. We've developed our apprenticeship hub, which we're leading the way. So actually just before today, as part of our inclusive economy board, we address these things directly. And we have an opportunity in this country now, because the workforce has shrunk, because a lot of people through COVID have thought, you know, I don't like my job, I'm going to give up. There's a lot of people retired early. You know, my wife's a GP. Trying to find a GP who's over 50 these days is very rare, because a lot of them are thinking, you know what, this is not what I signed up for. It's relentless, and people are leaving. And of course, a lot of people who were European nationals left because of the pandemic, went to stay with the families, can't get back in because of the visa situations. And so there's a big mismatch between vacancies and skills across the country. And we have that phrase, people furthest from the labour market. It's been the case that for a long time, I think, successive policy has been on a national level, punish people into work, not train people, encourage people into work by sanctioning benefits. And that drives people further from the labour market, drives them into the black economy, for example. And we have an opportunity as a country, and even if the national government isn't going to seize it, I am, and I know my fellow Northern Labour mayors are, and we are making sure that the people who employers perhaps in the past wouldn't have looked at, wouldn't have given a job to, that these people are getting the support and the mentoring and the nurturing they need to become employable, because that's in everybody's interest, particularly theirs. So that's what we're doing on skills, Linda.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And thank you, Linda, for your question. That's fantastic, and it's great to hear about all these schemes that, you know, these are all schemes that we're kind of aware that you were wanting to start when you started, you know, in the first 100 days and all that. I remember hearing all that, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and hearing now that all these things are coming to fruition is fantastic, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant to hear. Well, Jamie, we're kind of reached the end of our time here this evening. Thank you very much for joining us here this evening. It's great to be in person, isn't it? It's great to share a room together and share our politic and communicate together where we're at and the things that are interesting, and having a chance to hear you and hear your passion and hear your enthusiasm for everything you've been doing despite how difficult it's been for you. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for our Mayor, Mr. Jamie Driscoll.
Thank you, everybody.
I'd like to thank you all for joining us. I'd like to thank Jamie's team, who've been fantastic in putting this event together. I'd like to thank everyone who's been watching at home or at work, on your computers and whatnot. Thank you very much for tuning in and joining us. I'd like to thank the venue for hosting us. They've been very kind and very fantastic. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Take care and good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jamie.